Welcome to the third session of the day. I'm Matthew Waters, Managing Director of Insurance and Reinsurance Recruiter Harrison Holgate. We were founded in 2006. We are a specialist consultancy providing recruitment and advisory services across the London Lloyd's and the regional markets. And with me, I have Clare Lebecq. I'll just do a quick intro. Clare, currently COO of the Specialist Risk Group, who are a rapidly expanding specialist insurance business with I think it's over 500 employees. SRG have wholesale broking, retail broking and underwriting divisions. Clare is also Vice President for the Insurance Institute of London, and her previous career includes as CEO of the London Market Group, and also Director and Senior Operational roles in both broking and syndicate environments. But of particular note is that whilst at LMG, Clare, in conjunction with KPMG, produced a report on the future of skills in the London insurance market.
Nice to be here with you, Matthew.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So we're here to talk about operational agility, really, and optimizing resources. Lots of people that we come across or we speak to or deal with in our world, probably in terms of what is agility, probably think agility is flexible working or hybrid working. But actually, why don't we just kick off with, what is agile working?
I think it's as you say, it's very common for people to mix up agile working with flexible or hybrid working, which obviously is about the, where you work and how often you work. Whereas agility is something different. For me, it's got three elements. The first element of working agile is creating an agile culture. And that's around creating a really good learning environment, and one where people feel safe to fail because they are encouraged to try new things. The second element of it is we tend to think about people as their role rather than the skills and the talent that they bring to the table. It's about really looking at your talent pool and your skills within your organization and using them to the best of your ability to create to achieve your business goals. So that means breaking down the silos, being much more collaborative, and putting people in new roles and leadership roles for a short period of time, so that they can test out those skills. And thirdly, it's about where you don't have the talent inherently in the organization. It's about buying in new talent, using the gig economy to try and fill the business needs that you have at the time. So it's got those three elements.
I mean, I guess that's interesting. We were talking earlier on about soft skills and hard skills, and really, if you were looking about or stepping back and thinking about for certain types of roles, what are the important things that a person needs to have to fulfill a role successfully? And often, the things that we're looking for in those roles are behavioural.
Absolutely, because we were talking about the further up the organisation you get, the more important those. I mean, they're important at every level, but you tend to rely on them more and use them more in the higher up you get in an organisation. And obviously, the technical part of your role in insurance obviously gets less and less. But I guess the key thing is about recognising what they are and recognising that people up and down the organisation have those inherent skills and talents, and that we should be using those to the best effect and making sure that people have the opportunity to practice those skills in a safe environment.
Looking at things from an agile working or an agile business, if you like, the key thing for developing skills, interacting with other people, how you share knowledge across the organisation. The challenge, it seems to me, for all of our businesses, everybody talks about the skills gap, but the challenge for me is how you actually pass information across the business. Can you shed any light on that?
I think agile, if you think about an agile environment and breaking down the silos and enabling people to be deployed across your organisation within different areas as and when the need arises, you're absolutely right. Now that we've gone to a hybrid way of working and some people are working from home more than others, and spend less time in the office, obviously they have less opportunity to interact with different people within the organisation that don't necessarily work on the business that they're working on or the department that they're working on. With Agile, if you allow those people to be deployed in different parts of the organisation at different periods of time, it gives them the opportunity to have those interactions with people outside of their normal sphere of communication and reference. And that's what the great thing is about Agile, is that if you do break down those silos and allow those people to work on different things, they have different interactions and therefore become more rounded within the organisation, and just have experience of others that have different skills that they can then learn from. But of course, there's different kinds of organisation. I think it's quite important to recognise that on the call here, on this event, we've got organisations of different sizes, people from organisations of different sizes. So with Agile, it's not really one size fits all. I think the most important thing to remember is there's three elements of Agile. So in a smaller organisation where you have got a deficit of talent, you might need to buy in and use the gig economy. And traditionally, we've thought and we've used that in primarily IT type roles. But obviously, there are people out there that you can buy in from a talent perspective with the different skill sets. But I think that's one way that you can obviously implement it as an organisation that is smaller. Likewise, with a larger organisation, you've got many more people, many more talents, many more skills, and that requires obviously to map those talents and skills to know where those pockets are, so that when you need to call on them, you can call on them. But obviously, over both of those types of organisation, creating an agile culture, so one where people feel free to experiment, to feel free to and have a learning. We are being a learning organisation, and people feeling safe to fail, if you like, when they try new things. You can do that across both kinds of organisation, be that small or be that large. It's creating the right environment for that, which is really important, which is one of the first steps to actually working in a more agile way.
The benefit in a post-COVID world then of an agile insurer gives them some flexibility within their resource. I mean, I don't know where the tipping point comes in terms of a size of an organisation, but for bigger companies with larger talent pools will find these things much easier. But if you're in a smaller business and you still want to work with more agility and with that outsourcing, say for example using the gig economy or contractors, there are so many different models. I mean, what are the options?
Yeah, of course. I mean, obviously you can. Outsourcing is not new. It's something that we've done across the piece for, either outsourcing to, another, places like India or Thailand, or insourcing where you outsource to an organisation within the UK. There's lots of models. I know that there's one of the new insurers has adopted that model. Instead of building their own capability, they've outsourced it to, or insourced it to another firm. I know that you work quite closely with them. There's that kind of model, but obviously that's not, again, that could be an option for a larger organisation. Whereas for a smaller one, it is about using this gig economy, using the contractors, and not necessarily, as I say, for IT projects, but for other things like the data analytics that you might need somebody to set up that environment for you, but not necessarily, and then train some of your talent to maintain it. But you don't need a long-term resource. That's why that gig economy is so great, because you can buy in the talent that you need. Now, obviously, I think the problem with that is that sometimes it's the cost implications, because we all know that using a contractor is more expensive. But if you don't want to build that for the long term, you just want help at a particular point in time, it's a great way of getting that talent in and working with them to achieve a particular business outcome that you need. Obviously, the outsourcing is far bigger. As I said, you can use the outsourcing to places like India, or the insourcing is particularly if you're just a startup and you don't want to invest at that time, because you're not quite sure how it's going to pan out, what the requirement is that you need. Using that outsourcing model allows you to flex up and down as the business changes, and then there might be a tipping point in time where you decide, actually, I want to build that talent myself. But that sort of model gives you the opportunity to do that in terms of not putting all of your eggs in one basket, and being able to use the resources of a partnering firm. And I think partnering is also really important when we talk about agile, whether it be partnering with an outsourcing firm or an insourcing firm, or partnering with a technology firm. I think being agile is also about how you use technology to help you with all these things. And so this partnering model is becoming more and more important, I think, within our industry.
How easy is agile working to implement, I suppose, in terms of the considerations, or how you might get started, or how would you go about evaluating your talent pool?
I think that, and I think it's not an easy thing. It's not a quick fix. It's not something you can do overnight. Obviously, the first part is to actually start trying to map your talent. So don't just think about it in terms of role, but actually map the talent that you have. What are the skills that these people have? So you've got like a talent matrix. And then you might think about, okay, let's pilot it in a smaller area, an area which is more open to change, and say, okay, let's break down the silos. Let's pick the person that has clearly got the talent, a leadership talent, but it's not in a leadership role, and give them the opportunity to lead on this piece of work. But obviously, in that scenario, you need to have that agile culture, which means that you don't have to go through umpteen layers of bureaucracy to pull that person out to help you. And obviously, you've also got to create a culture where people feel both empowered and open to that way of working. So I would say, start off small in a particular area and just test it out. And if you have created that agile culture where you can fail fast, and it is, the culture is to trial things and create new things, within an organization, then that's what I would do. Start small. But I think the talent mapping piece is the bit that takes the time, because if you have got a large workforce, that's not going to be a small piece of work. Now, we created, when we were at the LMG, when I was at the LMG, we created 2 bodies of work. The first one was, as you said, about the future of talent. But the second one, we worked with a company, with Willis Towers Watson, but with the consulting arm, to look at 100-day plans. That if you do want to start to implement, an agile way of working, what are the things you have to do, and they set out a 100-day plan in there. So there is sort of a methodology to it, but it's not a quick fix. It's something that you build up over time, and there are certain steps that you have to go through to get to a point where you can then start being and using and deploying your talent more effectively.
Yes. And it sounds like for this to really work, it needs to have a drive from the top as well, in terms of having an agile culture.
Yeah, I think it's from top to bottom, though, because obviously when you're pulling people out of teams to work on different things, that team has to be fully bought into that way of working. But equally, you need to make it clear that if there is a gap, then they can potentially go and look somewhere else to fill that gap internally, so that you have this really nice sort of fluidity of talent within the organization that is learning and working with different people all the time. And I think that's quite important. When we were doing the research for those particular pieces of bodies of work, when we were talking to the younger people, they said, what we want is not to be siloed. We want that flexibility to learn, continually learn by moving around an organization, and not just have, the traditional graduate scheme rotation where you spend 6 months here, 6 months there, 6 months somewhere else. It's more about actually, working and feeling valued and showing your value in an organization by moving around. But, that doesn't happen overnight. And as I say, that's why, trying to create pockets of that within your organization is, to pilot it is a really good way to start in a larger organization. Slightly different, as I said, in a smaller organization where you don't have a big wealth of talent, and that's when obviously but creating a culture of continual learning is important. But as I say, using the gig economy to fill those gaps is obviously another way of becoming more agile.
For sure. I mean, when you talk about buying in talent, I suppose, do those people need to come from the insurance market, do you think?
Depends. I mean, we put a big focus on experience, don't we, in the insurance market, and that actually we've been criticised for when we're creating our job descriptions to really emphasising a lot on experience within the industry, which then precludes us from some of the other talent pools that are available to us. I think we need to do a lot more within the industry to improve the way our job descriptions are written, and for the importance we put on knowledge and experience in the industry versus the behavioural traits that we actually need for an organisation, which is something we talked about at the very beginning, wasn't it? When we talked about when leaders are asked to write down the things that if they were going to be leaving, that the new person filling their boots would need, a lot of them are behavioural. And I think actually as an industry, we need to be far more explicit about the behavioural traits that we need for a role rather than the experience, because we do preclude ourselves from some of the really good talent that's out there.
I think that's a really interesting point. It's talked about, and it's more prevalent now than ever, the conversation or the talk around the skills shortage or the lack of people that could undertake a certain or a particular type of role. Often, the qualities that clients are looking for, even at the mid-level, the types of things that the clients want or that they would need to consider a good person, aren't actually technical skills. I guess maybe the closer you get to the actual kind of interaction with a client, if you like, the person needs a degree of technical knowledge in a particular product or something like that. But again, that can be taught quite quickly. It often comes down to the behavioural or the soft skills of that person. So again,
and also the culture within which they've been brought up. I mean, I've got an example for SRG in terms of how we're working in a more agile way. We've got a large scale IT implementation going on, and we're really short of BA talent. And we all know, I'm sure on this call, that getting a good business analyst is really, really difficult at the moment, as it is for many other skills. So we've looked around the organisation at people that have previously shown an aptitude for that kind of work. And we've said, actually, would you like to come in for this period of time and work with us? And it's been great because their manager has said, yeah, it's a really great opportunity for them to do that. We can manage around that. We can use some talent that we've got. Fortunately, with all the acquisitions we've made over the last year or so, we've got plenty of talent around to help fill those gaps. But we've pulled that person in, and they don't necessarily have BA qualifications, but they've got the aptitude and the skill set that we've recognised from previous bits of work we've done with them, and we've pulled them in. But equally, at the end of that, we'll give them the option to say either you can stay here and work within the BA team, or you can go back to work where you were before. But is that sort of like, the fact that their manager didn't say no, you can't have them. They do this role for me, and it's in that box. That's a real practical way of how we've shown agility within SRG to actually break down those silos and recognise where there was somebody that we really needed, that we were struggling to get externally, but we actually had talent internally that we could redeploy or deploy in a different way.
So you talked about a trial, but I mean, how would you measure the success, or what would you consider success to be?
I think if you do trial something with kind of project type activity that's got a start and a finish, I think obviously it becomes a lot easier to measure, because obviously you've got a defined outcome that you're trying to get to, and you either get to that outcome successfully and tick all the boxes, or you don't. In terms of more long-term agility, it does become slightly more difficult if you haven't got sort of like a project-based activity to carry out. And I think that's where agile comes into its own, is where you have got these pockets of project. And I don't just mean an IT project. It can be a project like a business development project, or some kind of research project. Again, we've got a project going on with us for Europe where we've pulled two people from completely disparate parts of the business together, because again, we've seen them work on research within their own departments already. That will have a very clear outcome. We'll do the business plan, and that will be a body of work that we can then say, okay, that has come to an end, we'll now take it forward. I think it's a lot easier to measure if it is project based as opposed to BAU. But it could work. I haven't seen it work in that environment, but in project work it works really well. And then you've got the defined metrics to measure success or not.
I mean, I can remember, from my own perspective. So I worked in the insurance industry before coming into the recruitment sector, and the company I worked for at the time, Commercial Union, went through a big agile working project where they effectively decided to turn underwriting and claims on its head, and they moved lots of the middle managers around. So if you were a team leader in underwriting, you went to run a claims team and vice versa, and the next rung up, they moved the roles around. And it was a huge shock to the system for all of us, because I think we'd all worked under the conception that if you were an underwriting person, you were always an underwriting person. And if you were a claims person, you were always a claims person. And actually we were on different floors and we didn't necessarily always talk to each other. And, it's funny when I look back on it, but it was a terrific success for the period of time that it lasted. Because of course, Commercial Union merged with General Accident, so that then evolved things there. But it was really fascinating because you really did have somebody with a different outlook or approach coming into your area of the business and saying, "Oh, why have you always done it that way?
That's right.
What about this?" So I've always been keen to challenge clients on what do you actually need for this particular role. Do you really need somebody who's got that skill, or what can we be flexible on, or what about if we came at it from this angle?
That's right. And looking internally, I think looking internally piece is really important. We are too quick to go out, and can we organize ourselves internally to give to use the talent we have internally more effectively. And I think that's really a really good way of trying to think about it.
If there are people watching now that are thinking of exploring agile working for their organizations, how would you start? Where would you start?
I think reading the two reports that the London Market Group did, they were with two very different consulting firms. One was KPMG, and they had a particular perspective, and they looked at roles throughout the whole organisation, both in underwriting and broking. But equally, the Willis Towers Watson collaboration was also really helpful, because that was done sort of in COVID, as we were just sort of coming out of the first lockdown. There's some really good case studies and the 100-day plan that Willis Towers Watson put together for an organisation that is thinking about doing it. And there were some quite helpful tools and tips as well. But I can see in the chat, there's a really interesting question about risk. And of course, stuff doesn't come without risk. But in the example I just gave in terms of pulling the person out of the business into our to be a BA, absolutely there was risk involved. But that's why we worked very closely with the manager to say, okay, what can we do from a resource perspective, deployment perspective, to help fill those gaps? And again, because they were so solution focused and not problem bringing, if you like, we were able to work through that. But that was because I was very lucky to have, at SRG, we've tried to build that culture already, but it doesn't come without some inherent risk. And it depends, obviously, it's about people really running towards this way of working. But that's how we managed it, because the manager with whom we took from whom we took that and we redeployed that resource was very open to solutioning the hole that person left in their team.
So, I mean, I think if somebody was looking at exploring agile working for their organization, again, just the thing that I took away was just thinking about the talent mapping exercise.
Yeah.
That sounds like the most time consuming.
Yeah, definitely. But again, if you start sort of small with 2 or 3 teams and start mapping that, it soon becomes clear where you've got your hotspots. Because often, for example, we went on a team away day, and I had no idea that one of the people that I was on the team with, they had an absolute passion for presenting and for standing up in an audience, and we were always being asked as an organisation to provide people for events like this, etc. And it wasn't until we got really talking and that sort of became uncovered. And it's amazing the kinds of things you find out when you start that exercise. Talents that you didn't really realise people had that can be really helpfully deployed. It doesn't necessarily always have to be internally. as I say, now we've discovered that this person has a real passion for presenting. Whenever our PR firm comes to us and says we've got a role, a vacancy for a speaker, we say, oh, we know just the person, because we've uncovered that hidden talent and that passion from them. So, but you're right, it is definitely the most time-consuming element of creating this a more fluid workforce.
Yes. I mean, I think to me, it's fascinating. And I think, again, if we sort of recap what we've covered in terms of what agile working is, so many people that think it's hybrid or flexible working, it's more about deploying or looking at the skills of your workforce and figuring out where you can deploy them. And I think it's fantastic to cover that as a differentiation. And I think, again, looking at the benefits having an agile approach will have post-COVID, I can't imagine there's been a greater need for us to have that skill set. Across all of our clients, we have never had the number of vacancies that we're seeing now from our clients. I mean, it's unprecedented in terms of the number of roles that we have to fill as a business. It's also never been as hard to find the people for these jobs. But for the companies that succeed, because there will be winners and there will be losers from this period of time, the winners, I think, are the ones that embrace this agile working, and it is having that flexibility of thought around how do you address the need for this particular role or for this particular process.
It might be easier to fill the role internally by looking at the current talents that you have, and then when you pull them out to fill the role that they've left behind potentially, than it is to fill the role that you need. That individual might not have 100% of the skills, but they probably have a good cross section of them. But and the role that they're leaving behind, that may be actually easier to fill. But it's just that sort of breaking down those silos.
Yes. So we have the polls in. So how uniform is your working model? 78% full hybrid, 0% fully back in the office, 22% London or HQ hybrid, 0% more face-to-face in London, more work from home in the regions. So 78%. So how uniform is your working model? 78% fully hybrid. How does that sort of ring with you, Claire, in terms of, because I guess there's two things here, isn't there? There's what's happening in the regions and what's happening in London.
Absolutely. And I think we've seen, we have regional offices as well as our London HQ. And I can see, definitely there's more office time in the regions, as in our experience, than in London. And I think in London, obviously, we are so interconnected with how we work with other organisations in the market, like our underwriters, etc., that we sort of, mirror what they're doing. And a lot of them are not going back full time. I think, it's very interesting how that has developed over time. But as I say, the issue that you have is that, we become even more siloed than we already are because of the lack of chance interactions in the office, etc., which is why agile can be really helpful, because whereas an organisation, we're helping individuals with those interactions and the ability to cross-sell themselves, I guess, across different parts of the business.
I surveyed a number of the serviced office companies around London, and I went from the West End across to the city. Smaller companies tend to be in the office more. Larger companies tend to be either fully remote or hybrid. So there's it's a complicated landscape when we're looking at that, but that's interesting. And then the other survey that's been run, what are the biggest barriers to moving from roles to a fluid skills-based organisation? And we have 11% saying cross-functional collaboration, 16% saying fair rewards and remuneration, 26% change management and planning, 26% winning management buy-in,
So I
16.
think that whole piece, you've got over 50%. It is the change management piece, and it is the buying in of management to that way of working. And we saw in my case study where I'd taken somebody out of a business function into another function. We couldn't have done that without the willing collaboration and problem solving ability of that manager, because they were fully bought into that way of doing things. So I think it's absolutely right. Obviously, that's very key, and it's not easy. And equally, the change management piece, the planning, you do need to get it right, and you do need to have that change management piece. And it is toned from the top. I know it's sort of a bit of a cliche now, but you do have to work really, really hard to do that. I think also it's been very interesting too with us. Again, another interesting case study about how it works. We've got our Irish entity in Dublin, and we have a requirement to put more substance over in Ireland to help our reverse branch model work. And again, we've had three or four people transition across there from the UK. Again, a very willingness on management to support that. And actually, those internal roles that have been filled, that the internal roles left in London have been filled internally by sort of shuffling everybody up. And then that's allowed us then to look at bringing in some younger apprentices to fill that gap. So that's been like really interesting, and how we've sort of coped with that. That's a more permanent move. But it just shows you that sort of breaking down those silos and creating more opportunity for people, really, I think. But again, it shows that willingness to problem solve, I think, and to really embrace the change.
From your perspective, Claire, how much progress have you seen since the KPMG LMG report?
It's difficult for me. I mean, when I was sitting as the CEO of the LMG, I had a real broad perspective over what was happening. We had some really heavy hitters around the LMG board table, and I had a very big exposure to what people were doing and their progress. At the time the report came out, people were like, "Oh my goodness, this seems like a completely different way of looking at things," but obviously recognized that we had a bit of a call to action at that point. All I can say is that I was quite surprised at so when I moved to SRG a year ago, I was quite surprised at how mature they were in terms of agile working and what they'd taken. So Joanne Wright, who's our Director of People and Culture, was sent the report and tabled it at the board. And I think the way that SRG have embraced it is like really encouraging. Unfortunately, I can't talk for the rest of the markets. I don't have that visibility anymore. But certainly when the report was released, there was an awful lot of discussion around it about how important it was, particularly with the younger generation coming through, and how important it was as a tool to help us retain that talent, because people don't want to be sort of siloed into a single role for any long periods of time. They want that opportunity to experience different parts of the business and to interact with different parts of the business and take on different roles from a leadership perspective in the business. The KPMG report was written prior to lockdown.
Yes.
But in lockdown, as I said, the LMG then commissioned another report with Willis Towers Watson, which was about, okay, what has COVID done to change, the environment? And that's got some really good ideas and some really good observations about how lockdown changed people's use of technology and ways of working.
Follow-up question here was, does the pandemic call for a completely fresh approach? I mean, I read the LMG report, and I mean, it's fascinating. And again, I think probably, I'm sure you would say, for anybody who was thinking of exploring agile working for their organizations, that report must surely be a great place to start.
Yeah, that and the Willis Towers Watson one, because the Willis Towers Watson one gives some more practical advice on becoming agile, mapping your talent, etc., which I think is quite important. But I think, obviously cultural change just doesn't happen overnight. And I think, organisations preparing for that, you know, it's not going to be a quick fix. So, you know, but I definitely think that those two reports are a really good place to start, because especially as one's post and one's during, and one's pre rather, and one's during and post pandemic from an outlook perspective, you can really compare how the thinking has moved on within those two reports. And as I said, they were done with an enormous amount of collaboration from both the London market and a little bit further afield, because I know that we've got, you know, people on this session from outside London. It's not particularly London focused. It's, you know, it's a general comment and narrative around the challenges that we're facing as an industry. You know, as I say, both pre and post pandemic.
Yes. And also, by the way, that's not just, you know, I mean, that's for insurers, brokers, everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. It deals with, you know, it deals with every claims as well, you know, and some of the other support functions too.
Yeah, I'm out of questions, unless there's anything else you want to add, Claire.
No, I mean, I think, as I say, it's not easy, but I think it's something that we need to do. I definitely think it would benefit our organisations and our industry hugely if we became a little bit more agile and less siloed. I think, you know, we would better serve our customers, we'd better serve our organisations, and we'd better meet our business needs without having to, you know, always, you know, struggle to get the best talent. I think it's, you know, it's got huge benefits, but I'm not saying that it's going to be easy.